Let me talk to you about the most dangerous decade in a man's financial life. It is not your 20s, when you are just starting out and have little to lose. It is not your 30s or 40s, when you are building and have time to recover from mistakes. It is the decade between 60 and 70, when you have the most to lose, the least time to recover, and a psychology that is working against you in ways nobody warns you about. I have watched hundreds of successful men destroy decades of careful wealth building during these 10 years. Men who did everything right for 40 years and then made catastrophic mistakes at the worst possible time. Men who entered their 60s with security and entered their 70s with anxiety, regret, and depleted portfolios. The traps they fell into were not random. They were predictable patterns that repeat themselves generation after generation, and they are almost entirely avoidable if you know what to watch for. Today, I am going to share the biggest financial traps that catch men between 60 and 70. These are not the traps that get talked about in financial planning seminars. These are the psychological and emotional traps that ambush men precisely because they are not expecting them. If you are a man approaching 60, in your 60s now, or watching someone you care about navigate this decade, pay close attention. What I am about to share could save you from financial disaster. Let me start with a story that illustrates how quickly things can go wrong. In 2008, I had lunch with a man I will call Richard. He was 63 years old, had recently retired from a successful career in manufacturing, and had accumulated about $2.8 million in retirement savings. By any reasonable standard, Richard was set for life. He could withdraw $100,000 per year and never run out of money. 3 years later, Richard was nearly broke. His portfolio had dropped to under $400,000, not primarily because of the financial crisis, though that played a role, but because of a series of decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but were actually traps he walked into with his eyes wide open. Richard's story is not unusual. It is disturbingly common. And understanding what happened to him will help you understand the traps I want to warn you about. The first trap Richard fell into, and the first trap I want to discuss, is what I call the last chance mentality. When men hit their 60s, something psychological shifts. They become aware, often for the first time viscerally rather than intellectually, that their earning years are ending. The ability to recover from financial mistakes through future income is disappearing. Time is no longer on their side for some men. This awareness leads to appropriate caution, but for others, it triggers the opposite reaction. They become desperate to make one last big score, one last investment that will set them up forever, one last chance to prove they still have what it takes. Richard had this mentality. He looked at his $2.8 million and thought it was not enough. He wanted $3.5 million or $4 million or some other number that felt more secure, and he thought he could get there quickly if he just made the right aggressive moves. So instead of preserving what he had, Richard started taking bigger risks. He concentrated his portfolio in sectors he thought were about to boom. He invested in speculative opportunities that promised high returns. He used strategies he did not fully understand because they seemed sophisticated and profitable. The 2008 crash hit his concentrated portfolio hard. But worse, the investments he had made in search of that last big score turned out to be disasters. The speculative opportunities failed. The sophisticated strategies blew up. His desperation to turn $2.8 million into $4 million ended up turning $2.8 million into something far less. The last chance mentality is a trap because it reverses the risk profile exactly when it should not be reversed. In your 60s, you should be reducing risk, not increasing it. You should be preserving capital, not swinging for the fences. You should be accepting that what you have is probably enough and focusing on not losing it. Every year I see men fall into this trap. They have accumulated substantial wealth through decades of steady work and sensible investing. Then they reach their 60s and suddenly become speculators, as if they can make up for lost time with a few bold moves. The math does not work that way. If you have $2 million and you lose 50%, you need a 100% return just to get back to where you started. At 65, you do not have time to wait for a 100% recovery. The last chance mentality destroys wealth precisely because it ignores this mathematics. What makes this trap particularly insidious is that it often disguises itself as prudence. The man falling into it tells himself he is being responsible, trying to secure his family's future, making smart moves to ensure comfort in retirement. The desperation is hidden behind a veneer of rational planning. But you can recognize the trap by its emotional signature. If you feel urgency about your investments, if you are drawn to opportunities that promise rapid growth, if you find yourself thinking that one more big win will finally make you feel secure, you are likely in the grip of the last chance mentality. The cure is acceptance. Accept that what you have is what you have. Accept that your wealth-building years are largely behind you. Accept that your job now is to preserve and enjoy what you have built, not to keep building. This acceptance is not defeat. It is wisdom. It is recognizing that the game has changed and playing by the new rules. The second trap is ego-driven investing. Men in their 60s have typically been successful in their careers. They have managed businesses, made important decisions, been respected for their judgment. This success creates confidence, which is generally healthy, but can become dangerous when applied to investing. The trap is believing that the skills that made you successful in your career translate directly to investing skill. They often do not. Running a manufacturing company does not make you a good stock picker. Being a successful doctor does not mean you understand bond markets. Leading a sales organization does not qualify you to evaluate real estate investments, but men in their 60s often think it does. They have decades of evidence that their judgment is sound. They have made countless good decisions. They trust themselves. And so they trust themselves to make investment decisions that are actually outside their competence. Richard had this problem. He had been a successful executive and was accustomed to making decisions and being right. When friends and acquaintances brought him investment opportunities, he evaluated them with the same confidence he had evaluated business decisions throughout his career. But investing is different from business operations. The information asymmetries are greater. The incentives of the people bringing you opportunities are often misaligned with yours. The ability to verify claims is limited. The feedback on whether you made a good decision is delayed by years. Richard invested in several private deals brought to him by people he trusted or thought he trusted. These were deals that required his business judgment to evaluate. He felt qualified to evaluate them. He was wrong. The deals failed, and he lost several $100,000 in investments that he would never have made if he had honestly assessed his competence. The cure for ego-driven investing is humility. Recognize that investing is a specific skill that you may not have. Regardless of how successful you have been in other domains, stick to simple, diversified investments that do not require you to be smarter than the market. And be deeply suspicious of any opportunity that flatters your intelligence or requires you to exercise judgment in areas where you have no track record. I have found that the most dangerous phrase in investing is, "I understand this business." Men who have been successful in one industry think they understand adjacent industries, or industries that serve their industry, or industries their friends are in. This perceived understanding gives them false confidence to make investments they should avoid. The truth is that understanding an industry as an operator and understanding it as an investor are very different things. You might know everything about how restaurants work because you ate at restaurants for 50 years or even owned one. That does not mean you can identify which restaurant stock will outperform over the next decade. The operational knowledge and the investment knowledge are separate domains. The men who preserve wealth in their 60s are usually the men who recognize the limits of their competence. They buy index funds instead of picking stocks. They avoid private deals regardless of how well they know the person offering them. They acknowledge that professional money managers with decades of experience and teams of analysts still usually fail to beat the market, and they have no reason to think they will do better. This humility is not weakness. It is strength. It takes more courage to admit what you do not know than to pretend you know everything. The third trap is the divorce trap. I know this is uncomfortable to discuss, but it is too important to ignore. Divorce rates for people over 60 have doubled in the past 25 years. The phenomenon even has a name now, gray divorce, and for men who have accumulated wealth, divorce in your 60s can be financially devastating. This is not about whether divorce is right or wrong in any particular situation. Sometimes marriages should end, but the financial consequences of divorce after 60 are severe enough that every man should understand them. When you divorce after decades of marriage, you are typically splitting assets that were accumulated jointly. That $2 million portfolio becomes $1 million for each person. The house that was paid off must be sold or bought out. Retirement accounts are divided. Social Security strategies are disrupted. Healthcare planning becomes more complicated. Beyond the direct splitting of assets, divorce often triggers the other traps I am describing. Men going through divorce often make impulsive financial decisions. They may be pressured into unfavorable settlements to end the conflict quickly. They may spend excessively to maintain the lifestyle they had or to prove something to themselves or others. They may enter new relationships that create additional financial complications. I watched a friend go through a gray divorce that cut his net worth in half, and then watched him lose another third of what remained through poor decisions made during the emotional turmoil of the process. He went from comfortable to anxious in less than 3 years. The financial trap of divorce is compounded by the timing. At 65, you do not have 20 years of earning to rebuild. The assets you lose are assets you will likely never replace. The financial foundation you built over a lifetime can be shattered in a year. I am not saying men should stay in bad marriages for financial reasons. I am saying that the financial stakes of divorce are enormous at this age and should be considered carefully. If your marriage is struggling, invest in trying to fix it before concluding. It cannot be fixed. The financial cost of marriage counseling is trivial compared to the financial cost of divorce. And if divorce is inevitable, get excellent legal and financial advice. Do not make decisions in emotional states. Think about the long-term implications, not just the immediate desire to move on. There is another dimension to the divorce trap that deserves mention. Some men in their 60s leave their marriages for younger women. The pattern is so common it has become a cliche, and the financial consequences are often severe. The new relationship frequently involves lifestyle inflation. The younger partner may have different expectations about spending, travel, housing. The man, eager to please and perhaps feeling competitive with younger rivals, often spends more than he would have in his established marriage. The dynamics of the new relationship may also create vulnerability to financial exploitation, whether intentional or not. I am not making moral judgments here. People's relationship choices are their own. But I am observing that men who leave long marriages for new partners in their 60s often experience significant financial damage beyond the divorce itself. The combination of split assets, changed spending patterns, and sometimes poor judgment in the new relationship can be devastating. If you find yourself contemplating this path, at least go in with open eyes about the financial implications. Consider whether the excitement of the new relationship is worth the financial security you may be sacrificing, and consider whether the new partner's interest in you would survive a significant reduction in your wealth. The fourth trap is what I call the rescue trap. Men in their 60s often have adult children who are struggling. A child who cannot find stable employment. A child going through their own divorce. A child who wants to start a business. A child who needs help with a down payment on a house. The instinct to help is powerful and often admirable, but helping adult children can become a financial trap that drains retirement resources that cannot be replaced. Richard fell into this trap as well. His son wanted to start a business and needed capital. Richard invested $200,000 in his son's venture. partly because he believed in the business and partly because he wanted to be a supportive father. The business failed within 18 months. The $200,000 was gone. Richard's son felt guilty, Richard felt disappointed, and the family relationship was strained by the failed financial arrangement. This pattern is common enough that I have seen it dozens of times. Parents depleting retirement savings to help adult children with results that are bad financially and often bad for the relationship as well. The rescue trap is particularly dangerous for men because of how many men derive identity from being providers. Even after retirement, even when the children are adults, the instinct to provide remains. Saying no to a child who needs help feels like failing as a father. But there is wisdom in the airline safety instruction to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. You cannot help your children in the long run if you exhaust your resources in the short run. A child whose parent becomes financially dependent on them has not been helped by the earlier financial gifts. If you want to help adult children, do it with clear limits. Give only what you can afford to lose completely. Make sure your own retirement security is not compromised. Consider whether the help is actually helping or merely postponing an inevitable reckoning that your child needs to face on their own. There is a particular version of the rescue trap that catches many men. It is the desire to set up adult children with houses. The child cannot afford a down payment or cannot qualify for a mortgage or wants a nicer house than they can afford. The father steps in to make it possible. This often goes wrong. The child ends up in a house they cannot actually afford to maintain. The father has tied up capital in an illiquid asset he does not control. If the child's marriage fails or job disappears, the father is pulled in further to prevent foreclosure. What started as a generous gift becomes an ongoing obligation that strains both finances and relationships. I have seen men pour $300,000, $400,000, even $500,000 into housing for adult children and end up with nothing to show for it but regret and family tension. If you want to help a child with housing, consider alternatives to direct purchase. Perhaps you could help with a down payment that is an outright gift with no strings attached. Perhaps you could co-sign a mortgage only if the child can demonstrably afford the payments. Perhaps you could help with rent while the child builds their own savings. These alternatives limit your exposure and preserve your ability to help in other ways later. The fifth trap is healthcare denial. Men are notoriously bad at dealing with health issues. We avoid doctors. We minimize symptoms. We believe we are invincible even as evidence accumulates that we are not. In your 60s, this tendency becomes financially dangerous. Health problems that are caught early are often treatable and manageable. Health problems that are ignored until they become crises are expensive, debilitating, and sometimes fatal. I have watched men ignore warning signs for years and then face medical situations that wiped out their savings. The heart attack that could have been prevented with medication and lifestyle changes, the cancer that was treatable at stage 1 but deadly at stage 4, the diabetes that was manageable until it caused kidney failure. These are not just health tragedies. They are financial tragedies. The cost of emergency medical care, extensive treatment, long-term care, and lost independence can destroy a retirement plan that would otherwise have been solid. The healthcare denial trap has another dimension. Many men in their 60s resist planning for long-term care because it forces them to confront their own mortality and potential decline. They do not want to think about needing help with daily activities. They do not want to imagine themselves in a nursing home. So they do not plan. They do not buy long-term care insurance. They do not have conversations with family about what they want. If they become incapacitated, they do not assess whether their assets could sustain years of professional care. And then something happens, a stroke, a fall, dementia, and the family is left scrambling to figure out how to pay for care that costs $10,000 per month or more, making decisions in crisis mode that could have been made thoughtfully years earlier. The cure for healthcare denial is simple but requires courage. Get regular checkups. Follow medical advice address problems early, have honest conversations about long-term care planning. Consider long-term care insurance while you can still qualify for it. Face the reality that bodies decline and plan for that decline rather than pretending it will not happen. The sixth trap is the boredom trap. Men who have had successful careers often find retirement disorienting. The structure that work provided is gone. The identity that came from professional accomplishment is fading. The days stretch out with no particular purpose. Boredom in retirement leads to bad financial decisions. Men start day trading to fill the time and feel engaged. They invest in businesses not because the businesses are good investments, but because involvement gives them something to do. They make purchases to fill the emptiness, buying boats or vacation homes or expensive hobbies that drain resources without providing lasting satisfaction. Richard fell into this trap too. Without the structure of work, he started actively managing his investments, making frequent trades, chasing performance, reacting to market news. This activity felt productive. It gave him something to focus on, but it was actually destructive. The trading costs, the tax inefficiency, the tendency to buy high and sell low, all of it eroded his portfolio faster than if he had simply left it alone. The boredom trap is insidious because the destructive activity feels like productive activity. You feel like you are doing something useful when you are actually doing something harmful. The busyness masks the damage. The cure for the boredom trap is to find meaning and engagement outside of financial activity. Volunteer. Mentor younger people. Pursue hobbies that do not require spending money. Spend time with family. Develop new skills. Build a life that is fulfilling without needing constant financial activity to feel meaningful. Your portfolio should be boring in retirement. If managing your investments is exciting, you are probably doing it wrong. Set up a sensible allocation, rebalance occasionally, and then find something else to do with your time. I have noticed that men who had highly engaging careers are most susceptible to the boredom trap. They are accustomed to challenge, to problem solving, to the adrenaline of high-stakes decisions. Retirement removes all of that. The void is enormous, and they fill it with financial activity because that is the closest thing to the engagement they are missing. The solution is not to find that engagement in portfolio management, it is to find it elsewhere. Some men discover that mentoring younger people provides the intellectual stimulation they crave. Others find that volunteering for organizations they care about gives them a sense of purpose and accomplishment. Still others pursue learning, taking up new subjects that challenge their minds without risking their wealth. The key insight is that the problem is psychological, not financial. The restlessness, the need for engagement, the desire to feel productive, these are valid needs. But satisfying them through constant financial activity is like scratching an itch with a knife. You might feel like you are doing something, but you are actually doing damage. Find your engagement outside the financial realm. Let your portfolio be boring so your life can be interesting. The seventh trap is the advisor trap. Men in their 60s are prime targets for financial advisors, and not all advisors have your interests at heart. You have money, you have anxiety about the future, you have complexity in your financial situation. These factors make you vulnerable to advisors who are more interested in their fees than your welfare. The advisor trap takes many forms. It might be an advisor who puts you in expensive, actively managed funds when low-cost index funds would serve you better. It might be an advisor who recommends complex insurance products with high commissions that you do not need. It might be an advisor who encourages frequent trading to generate transaction fees. It might also be an advisor who simply fails to understand your situation, who applies generic advice without considering your specific circumstances, who does not coordinate with your tax planning, who does not understand the withdrawal strategies that optimize your retirement income. Richard had an advisor who seemed professional and credible, but the advisor was primarily motivated by commissions and fees. The recommendations Richard received were not the best recommendations for Richard. They were the most profitable recommendations for the advisor. Navigating the advisor trap requires due diligence. Ask how the advisor is compensated. If they earn commissions on products they sell you, recognize that conflict of interest. Look for fee-only advisors who have a fiduciary duty to act in your interest. Check credentials and complaints through regulatory websites. Get a second opinion on any major recommendation. Better yet, educate yourself enough to understand what advisors are recommending and why. You do not need to become an expert, but you need to understand the basics well enough to recognize when something does not make sense. The eighth trap is the inflation trap. Men who retire in their early 60s may spend 30 years or more in retirement. Over 30 years, even moderate inflation dramatically erodes purchasing power. 3% annual inflation reduces the purchasing power of a dollar by more than half over 30 years. The inflation trap catches men who think about their expenses in current dollars without considering how those expenses will grow. A man who retires at 62 with expenses of $5,000 per m-month and a portfolio that generates $5,000 per m-month may feel secure. But if his expenses grow with inflation and his income does not, he will be in trouble within a decade. This trap is worse for men who shift too aggressively to bonds and fixed income in retirement. Yes, these investments are less volatile than stocks, but they often fail to keep pace with inflation over long periods. A portfolio that is too conservative for a 30-year retirement may actually be riskier than a portfolio with more stocks because it creates certainty of losing purchasing power rather than volatility in nominal returns. The cure for the inflation trap is to maintain some exposure to assets that grow over time, particularly stocks, even in retirement. Think about your expenses in future dollars, not just current dollars. Build in assumptions about rising costs for health care, housing, and daily living, and recognize that the biggest risk in a long retirement is not short-term volatility, but long-term erosion of purchasing power. Let me bring these traps together with some observations about why men in their 60s are particularly vulnerable. First, the 60s are a time of identity transition. The professional identity that defined you for 40 years is ending or has ended. This transition is disorienting and can lead to compensating behaviors that are financially destructive. Second, the 60s bring awareness of mortality. Time is no longer infinite. This awareness can trigger either excessive caution, which leads to missed opportunities, or excessive risk-taking, which leads to destroyed wealth. Neither extreme serves you well. Third, the 60s often bring family complexity, adult children with problems, aging parents who need care, marriages that have drifted, grandchildren who change priorities. These complexities create financial pressure and emotional stress that impair judgment. Fourth, the 60s represent peak accumulated wealth for most men. You have the most to lose precisely when your ability to replace losses is diminishing. This combination makes every mistake more costly than it would have been at 40 or 55th. Men in their 60s are targets. Financial services companies, scammers, family members, business partners, all see a man with money in declining years as an opportunity. The targeting is relentless and sophisticated. Given these vulnerabilities, how should a man in his 60s protect himself? Start with simplification. The more complex your financial life, the more opportunities for mistakes and exploitation. Consolidate accounts. Simplify investments. Reduce the number of financial relationships you need to manage. Next, build in checks. Do not make major financial decisions alone. Discuss them with a spouse, a trusted friend, an independent advisor. Require yourself to wait at least a week before acting on any decision involving more than a trivial amount of money. Create friction between impulse and action. Then, focus on preservation rather than growth. You have enough, or you are close to enough, or you never will have enough no matter how much you accumulate. In any of these scenarios, the priority should be not losing what you have rather than gaining more. Shift your psychology from accumulation to conservation. Also, invest in health. Every dollar you spend on preventive care, on exercise, on healthy food, on stress reduction, has potential returns that dwarf any investment return. A healthy retirement of 25 years is worth infinitely more than a wealthy retirement of 5 years. Finally, find purpose beyond money. The men who navigate their 60s successfully are usually the men who have meaning in their lives that does not depend on financial activity. They have relationships, interests, contributions that engage them fully. Money becomes a tool that supports their life rather than a focus that dominates it. Let me close with what happened to Richard, because his story has an ending that I hope yours will not share. After his financial disasters, Richard spent his 70s anxious and constrained. He could not afford the retirement he had planned. He worried constantly about money. He had conflict with his son over the failed business investment. His marriage, strained by the financial stress, eventually ended in divorce. Further depleting his resources, Richard died at 79 with little to leave behind and many regrets about decisions he made in his 60s. Decisions that seemed reasonable at the time but were actually traps he did not see. I tell you Richard's story not to frighten you but to warn you. The traps are real. They catch smart, successful men every day. But they are avoidable if you know what to watch for and have the wisdom to act differently. You have spent decades building what you have. Do not let the decade between 60 and 70 destroy it. Avoid the last chance mentality. Check your ego at the door, protect your marriage, help your children wisely, take care of your health, find meaning beyond money. Be skeptical of advisors, plan for inflation, simplify, build in checks, focus on preservation. The 60s can be a wonderful decade, a time of freedom and fulfillment and enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of work, but only if you avoid the traps that have caught so many men before you. You have been warned. Now, the choice is yours. I want to leave you with one more thought. The traps I have described are not character flaws. They are human tendencies that emerge predictably when men face the unique circumstances of their 60s. Falling into these traps does not mean you are foolish or weak. It means you are human. But knowing about the traps gives you power. You can watch for the warning signs, you can build in safeguards, you can make different choices than the men who came before you and did not know what they were walking into. The decade between 60 and 70 can be the best decade of your life. You have resources, freedom, experience, perspective. You are old enough to know what matters and young enough to enjoy it. The children are raised, the career pressures are lifting, the possibilities are opening up. Do not let financial mistakes rob you of this decade. Avoid the traps, preserve what you have built, and then use your 60s to live fully, generously, meaningfully, with the security that comes from having navigated the dangers successfully. Your future self will thank you. Your family will thank you. And you will have the satisfaction of knowing that you finished the game as well as you played it.